single, Dad protected his son from a mysterious woman. He didn't know she was a billionaire. CEO. The snow was falling sideways, thick and furious, as if the sky itself was grieving. New York shimmered under its weight, blanketed in white and silence, except for one corner of East 54th where the wind howled mercilessly through the alleyways. Ella Thorne, billionaire CEO of Thorne Dynamics, stood at the edge of the sidewalk, her heels sinking into slush, her breath curling like smoke in the frigid air. She had just walked out of the most brutal board meeting of her life, another round of backhanded praise, silent power plays, and old men who still looked at her like she was wearing her father's shoes. She didn't want the waiting car. She didn't want the private elevator or the penthouse view. She wanted air. Cold. Real. So she walked, past designer stores shuttered for the night, past flickering lampposts and snow-choked gutters. She wasn't thinking. Not really. Not until she saw the small figure huddled on a bench. She stopped dead. A child. A boy no older than 6 or 7, curled up on the freezing metal like he belonged there. No coat, just a too-small hoodie zipped to his chin and jeans stiff with frost. His sneakers were soaked through. Snow clung to his lashes like glitter. Ella's throat tightened. "No," she whispered. "No, not like this." She stepped closer. "Hey," she said, gently crouching beside the bench. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" The boy stirred. Eyes fluttered open, startlingly clear, shockingly calm. "You're not a dream, right?" he asked. Ella blinked. "No, I'm real. I thought maybe." "You were the one I wished for." She stared. "What's your name, Benji?" he whispered. "My dad said to stay here while he looks for work. He said if I waited real still, the cold would leave me alone." Ella looked around. The street was empty. No adults, no bags, just this tiny human curled into himself, waiting like a stray left behind. "You can't stay here," she said softly. "You'll freeze. Where's your dad now? He said he'd be back before my toes go numb. But—" Benji looked down. "They already are." Ella didn't think. She just pulled off her $1,000 cashmere coat and wrapped it around him, sinking to the bench beside him. "Okay," she said. "I'm staying with you. You're not alone." He looked at her wide-eyed. "You don't look like a snow angel." She laughed, though her chest ached. "I'm not. I'm worse. I'm a CEO." "What's that?" She smiled faintly. Someone who forgot what it means to feel things. Until 5 minutes ago. Benji's head dropped onto her shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I like you," he mumbled. "You smell like peppermint and important decisions." Ella was still sitting there coatless, holding a boy who wasn't hers when a voice broke the stillness behind them. "Benji." She turned. A man was running toward them, mid-30s, soaked to the bone breath, ragged hands scraped. His eyes, wild with panic, locked on the child, then flicked to her. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, pulling Benji into his arms. "Who are you?" "I found him here," Ella said, standing, alone, freezing. "I was trying to help." He looked at her, still shielding his son with his body. "And what exactly did you plan to do, fix him like a quarterly report?" She bristled. "No." Benji spoke up from his father's chest. "Dad, she's nice. She sat with me. She gave me her coat." Jack Rourke's face shifted just a fraction. The fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by wariness. "You gave him your coat?" "It was that, or watch his lips turn blue," she replied. He lowered his voice, ashamed. "I was checking a job site. I thought I could be back in 10 minutes. The snow came fast. Ella looked at him closely. His clothes were worn but clean, boots scuffed from labor, hands calloused. His face bore the quiet exhaustion of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. "You shouldn't have to leave a child in the snow for a shot at a paycheck," she said. Jack looked at her sharply. "You think I wanted this? I'm doing the best I can." "I believe you," she said quietly. Something shifted in his posture. Benji, still in his arms, tugged at the lapel of the coat now wrapped around him. Can she come with us? Dad? Jack blinked. Benji. Just to the shelter. I like her. Ella didn't flinch. I'll walk you. There's a diner around the corner. Let me at least buy him something warm. Jack hesitated. Then finally he nodded. 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth of a near-empty diner, a steaming mug of cocoa in front of Benji, a cup of black coffee untouched in front of Jack. Ella sipped tea, watching them quietly. How long's it been like this? She asked. Jack didn't answer at first. Then, a while. We were fine until the company folded. I was a systems tech. Contract work dried up. Couldn't make rent. And your family dead. Or dead to me. Either way, it's just us now. Benji reached for another marshmallow. Dad makes the best grilled cheese when we have a kitchen. Ella swallowed the lump in her throat. You know, she said gently, your son has better manners than most of my board members. Jack looked up. You really a CEO? I really am. He studied her. What's someone like you doing out here in a storm giving away $1,000 coats? She paused, then said the truth, looking for something real. Jack nodded once, slowly. Well, he said you found us. And just like that, the snow didn't feel so cold anymore. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and warm cinnamon, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes and somehow made you feel safer. Outside, the storm raged on blurring neon signs and burying parked cars in quiet white. Inside, the world had narrowed to 3 people and a corner booth lit by a single flickering bulb. Benji was halfway through his second grilled cheese cheeks, flushed from warmth and contentment, swinging his legs beneath the booth. Jack watched him, one hand resting protectively on the back of the seat, the other wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. Ella stirred her tea absent-mindedly, her eyes drifting between them. You always this generous with strangers? Jack asked, finally breaking the silence without looking at her. Only the ones who matter, Ella replied. He turned to her. You don't know me. Maybe not. But I saw your son asleep in the snow, trusting the world not to forget him. That tells me everything I need to know. Jack's jaw tightened. It's not like I had a choice. There's a line outside every job site. I leave him with someone I risk losing him. I take him with me, they don't even let me pass the gate. Sounds like the system's broken, she said. He scoffed. The system isn't broken. It works exactly as it was built to, just not for people like us. Ella let the silence sit a while before speaking. I didn't help him tonight because I felt sorry. I helped him because he reminded me what real strength looks like. Jack raised an eyebrow. He's 6, and already tougher than most men I know. Jack studied her, then really looked. Not at the coat she'd given away, not at the designer scarf folded on the booth beside her, but at her eyes. There was something behind them, something worn and unsaid. You know, he said slowly, you don't talk like the people I've worked for. Maybe you've worked for the wrong people. And you're the right one. Ella smiled faintly. I'm trying to be. Benji interrupted, then licking a glob of cheese from his fingers. Can we stay here forever? Ella chuckled. I don't think the waitress would like that. But it's warm, and it smells like pancakes. Jack reached over and gently tousled his son's hair. We've got a few more nights at the shelter, remember? Benji's smile dimmed just a bit, but the cots are loud, and they smell like feet. Ella looked at Jack. There's a short-term rental I keep for visiting consultants. It's empty, clean, safe. You could stay there for a few days. No strings. Jack's expression hardened. There are always strings. Not with me. Forgive me if I've learned not to trust free rides from people in tailored coats. She nodded. Fair enough. Then think of it as a temporary partnership. You need a place to stay. I need someone who knows how the other half lives. And what do you plan to do with that knowledge? Build another app that tells billionaires how to feel good about their taxes. That one hit. Ella blinked, then said softly, No. I'm building something real. Or I want to. but I can't do it if I stay in glass towers pretending I know what hunger feels like." Jack didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back watching her. "You really believe money can fix this?" "No," she said, "but people can." Benji looked up. "Can we bring hot cocoa?" Jack sighed, running a hand down his face. He looked at Ella, his defenses worn thin by exhaustion and the weight of too many years carrying everything alone. "You said no strings. None. You'll let us leave if it gets weird, immediately." He looked at his son, then back at her. Then, "Just for tonight." Ella smiled. "Deal." The apartment was tucked into a quiet block in Hell's Kitchen. Not flashy, but neat. A small second-floor unit with 2 bedrooms, fresh sheets, and a stocked fridge. Jack stood in the doorway, eyes scanning the space like it might vanish if he blinked too hard. Benji ran immediately to the couch and jumped into the cushions like they were made of marshmallows. Ella handed Jack the keys. "You can lock up behind me. I won't come uninvited." He hesitated. "Why are you really doing this?" Ella didn't blink. "Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. And because I can't walk past a frozen child pretending he's not cold." Jack said nothing for a long moment. Then softly, "You remind me of my wife." Ella stilled. She was direct and kind in a way that made you want to earn it. "What happened to her?" "She died. 2 winters ago. Flu. We didn't have insurance. She didn't want to go in debt just to stay alive." Ella looked at the floor. "I'm sorry. You should be. She could have run a company better than half the men on Wall Street." Ella met his gaze. "So could your son." A flicker of a smile ghosted his lips. Then gently he closed the door. Outside, Ella stood for a long moment, letting the cold bite at her skin. Her driver was waiting at the curb, but she didn't move. In that small apartment behind her was a man who had lost everything and still managed to raise a son who trusted strangers. In that apartment was a family that had fallen but not broken. And in that moment, Ella Thorne, woman of steel and strategy, felt the first crack in her armor. Not from pity, from awe. She turned and walked away coatless into the snow. Ella stared at her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls. The polished woman, staring back, wore a blazer worth more than most rent checks and heels that hurt like hell, but none of that mattered. Not after last night. She hadn't slept. Not because she was haunted, but because she wasn't. For the first time in years, her thoughts didn't spiral around projections and hostile takeovers. They circled something else entirely. A boy with snow on his lashes. A man with tired eyes and too much pride. And a silence between them that said more than a boardroom ever could. She stepped into her office, a vast glass space overlooking the city. Her assistant, Marnie, followed with a tablet. "Morning," Marnie said carefully. "You've got 10 minutes until the fiscal call. Push it." Marnie blinked. "Push a quarterly report." Ella nodded, and pulled the files on a man named Jack Rourke. Mid-30s, engineering background, lives off the grid. Marnie's brows furrowed, but she didn't question it. Any particular reason, Ella didn't look up. He matters. An hour later, a discreet digital file landed in her inbox. Ella opened it with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Name: Jack Rourke, age 36, education Massachusetts Institute of Technology, electrical engineering, partial completion work. History systems technician, freelance coder, temporary electrician. Note: no criminal record. Single parent to 1 son, Benji Rourke, age 6. Mother deceased, flu complications, no insurance. Evicted twice in 3 years. Shelter use confirmed. Ella exhaled slowly. My tea. He was once on a path the world valued until life rerouted him into the shadows. And still he hadn't collapsed. She clicked on the attached photograph, grainy, taken from a shelter ID. His eyes in that image weren't angry, just determined. The kind of quiet fire that could power cities if anyone ever looked close enough. And now she had. That evening, she visited one of her company's community kitchens, the kind they funded annually mostly for tax breaks and PR. But tonight, she arrived without notice, dressed in simple jeans and a coat that didn't scream billionaire. The kitchen bustled with volunteers, the clatter of pots, and the hum of conversation. She stood near the entrance, half hidden behind a support beam. And there he was. Jack. He wore a borrowed apron and an old gray hoodie beneath it. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms marked with years of real work. He moved with a quiet rhythm, stirring, wiping, organizing like he wasn't just feeding people. He was building something invisible. Dignity, perhaps. Benji was there too, perched on a stool with a crayon and paper plate sketching something with furious concentration. Ella leaned in quietly. "What are you drawing?" Benji looked up, startled. Then he grinned. "You came back. I said I would." He held up the plate. It was a stick figure drawing 3 people, one with long hair, one tall and scruffy, and one small with a giant smile. The words above them said, "My family, maybe." Ella's heart twisted. Before she could respond, Jack appeared, wiping his hands on a towel. His eyes flicked to Benji, then to her. "You followed us." "You're volunteering here," she replied calmly. "That's not an answer." She stepped closer. "I'm not here to interfere. I'm here because I want to understand what you live every day." He studied her arms, crossed. "Understand it or own it?" "Neither. I want to build something, but not without the people it's meant for." Jack narrowed his eyes. "You think you can just drop in with your money and your good intentions and fix what's been broken for decades?" Ella didn't flinch. "I don't want to fix it. I want to stand beside it, and maybe hold the flashlight while someone like you does the fixing." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, "You talk like someone who's trying really hard not to feel guilty. I talk like someone who's tired of pretending the world is fine." Benji tugged at his dad's sleeve. "Dad, she brought me hot cocoa when you couldn't." Jack glanced down, then sighed. His voice softened. "Did you eat yet?" She shook her head. "Then grab a bowl. It's lentil stew night." They sat together in the back room, after the rush, the kitchen quiet now except for the distant hum of the dishwasher. Jack leaned against the counter, arms folded. Ella sat on a milk crate, sipping slowly. "You used to be at MIT, she said." He nodded. 3 semesters. Dropped out when my wife got pregnant. Never went back. "Do you regret it?" He shrugged. "You don't regret the fire escape when it's the only way out." Ella tilted her head. "That's a hell of a line." Jack gave a wry smile. "You can use it. Just don't patent it." They shared a soft laugh. The kind that didn't come easy, but once it did, it stayed with you. After a beat, Ella said, "What if I told you I want to build a new kind of place, not a shelter, not charity, a space run by the people who've lived it, taught by them, led by them?" Jack arched a brow. "And you think the world will fund that? I don't care if they do. I will." He was quiet, thoughtful. Then, slowly, "If you're serious, you're gonna need more than a vision. You'll need someone who's been under the roof when it leaks." She met his eyes. "Are you offering?" "I'm not offering anything," he said carefully. "But I'm not walking away either." They sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't awkward. It was full of things neither knew how to say just yet. And then Benji burst in from the front, holding something in his hands. "Look," he shouted. They had leftover muffins. "And I saved one for you, Miss Ella." She took it, heart-catching. "That's very kind of you." Benji leaned against her leg. "You smell happier than yesterday." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What does happiness smell like?" Benji grinned. "Like cinnamon. And maybe a little scared." Ella smiled, tears stinging unexpectedly behind her eyes. For the first time in years, she had no comeback. Just gratitude. Just presence. And a name she couldn't forget. Jack Rourke. The next morning, the city awoke under a sky the color of steel. Slush puddles lined every curb and the wind had teeth again. But inside the apartment Ella had offered there was a warmth that didn't come from the thermostat. Jack stood at the stove, barefoot, wearing a worn white t-shirt, flipping pancakes in a pan that had been too clean to have ever seen syrup. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the air. Benji sat at the small kitchen table legs, swinging coloring intently on the back of a utilities envelope. "This one's you, Dad," he said, holding up a stick figure with wild hair and a spatula. "And this one's Miss Ella. She's got a cape." Jack glanced at the drawing, then back to the pan. "She doesn't need a cape, buddy. She already flies higher than most people I've ever met. She's coming again, right?" Jack didn't answer, because he didn't know. That afternoon, Ella did come, but not to the apartment. She came to the same kitchen where Jack had volunteered. Today, she wore no makeup, just a thick-knit sweater and jeans. Her hair was tucked into a beanie. If someone didn't know better, they'd never guess she had a direct line to every Fortune 500 CEO on the East Coast. She stood at the entrance until Jack noticed her. "You're back," he said, more surprised than he meant to sound. "Benji said it smelled like pancakes," she replied, deadpan. "I came to fact-check." Jack chuckled. "We're fresh out." "That's okay," she said. "I brought something else." She pulled out a folded paper layout draft scrawled with design notes and highlighter marks. At the top, in block letters, were the words, "The Hearth Project." Jack frowned slightly. "You're serious? I told you I was. And you want me to help build it?" She nodded. "From the inside out. I want this to be something no donor can put their name on. Just people, stories, dignity." He ran his hand down his jaw, thinking. "You're asking me to go back into a world that spit me out." "No," she said softly. "I'm asking you to help build one that would never spit anyone out in the first place." Their eyes locked. Then he asked the question he'd been holding on to since the night they met. "Why us, Ella? Why me and Benji?" She didn't blink. "Because you stayed gentle," she said. "Even when life gave you every reason to go hard. That kind of strength doesn't just inspire people, it restores them." He looked down, jaw tightening. Then he gave a quiet nod. "I'll think about it." That night, Ella stayed longer than she meant to. Benji convinced her to play a board game with him in the tiny living room. Jack made tea. The three of them laughed more in that 1 hour than Ella had in months. As she pulled on her coat to leave, Benji looked up at her. "Are you rich because you smile like that?" Ella crouched in front of him, heart aching. "No, sweetheart. I smile like this because you remind me why I want to be." Benji tilted his head. "Are we your project?" Jack stiffened behind them. The air went still. Ella answered without hesitation. "No," she said steady. "You're my reminder." Benji grinned and threw his arms around her. "You smell like home." Later that week, a new layer of frost coated the city. Jack stood alone at the construction site Ella had suggested for the hearth, a defunct community center she'd quietly purchased years ago, hoping to renovate it someday. Today, someday, had come. He walked its cold halls, studied the cracked tiles and faded bulletin boards, imagined what it could be. A kitchen where no one felt ashamed to eat. A classroom for skills, not salvation. A garden. A nursery. Maybe even a tiny library. But it wasn't the vision that got to him. It was the fact that she believed he could lead it. Back at the apartment that evening, Jack sat on the edge of the bed watching Benji sleep. He ran his hand through his son's hair and whispered, "Maybe she's right, kiddo. Maybe we don't just survive. Maybe we build." The next day, he met Ella outside the building. "You got a second?" he asked. She raised a brow. "Only if it ends with good news." Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded layout she had given him, now scribbled with his own notes, calculations, wiring suggestions. "I'm in," he said. She smiled slowly. "What changed your mind?" He shrugged. "I remembered something my wife used to say." "What was that?" "You don't fix the world by yelling at it from the curb. You fix it by walking straight into the mess and making a corner of it beautiful." Ella's eyes shimmered. "That's exactly what I want this place to be," she whispered. "A beautiful corner. Then, after a pause, she added, "We start tomorrow." That night back at the apartment, Benji crawled into his father's lap with a book. "Dad." "Yeah." "Do you think Miss Ella has a bedtime?" Jack chuckled. "Probably not. People like her, they're always thinking." Benji yawned. "Then maybe she needs someone to tuck her in too." Jack kissed the top of his son's head. "Maybe she just needs someone who sees her not her title. Just her." Benji nodded sleepily. "Like we do." And somewhere in the city, Ella stood at her penthouse window, the lights below twinkling like stars caught in snow. In her hand was a crayon drawing 3 stick figures under a roof labeled home. She placed it gently on her nightstand. And for the first time in years, she turned off the light and slept without armor. Snow had started to fall again, soft and quiet this time, like the city was holding its breath. Inside the old building, now dubbed the Hearth, the air was filled with the hum of hammers, the crackle of paint cans being opened, and the sound of people who hadn't been seen in a long time, being heard. Volunteers worked shoulder to shoulder with shelter residents, and Jack Rourke moved among them like he'd done this all his life. Maybe he had. At the center of it all was Ella Thorne, the so-called Ice Queen of Wall Street, holding a clipboard and a power drill. In boots and rolled-up sleeves, she looked nothing like the woman on Forbes magazine covers. She looked real. "You sure you've used one of those before?" Jack asked, glancing at the drill in her hand. Ella didn't look up. "I built a company from the ground up, Jack. I think I can handle a few screws." He smirked. "Yeah, but when your company crashes, nobody ends up with drywall in their eye." She looked at him, then half amusement, half challenge. "That depends on who you ask." Benji burst into the room holding something triumphantly in both hands. "Look what I found." He held up a dusty whiteboard from a back storage room, a few marker streaks still ghosted across it. "We can write the menu on this," he said, "like a real restaurant." Jack smiled. "That's a great idea, buddy." Ella knelt down beside him. "What should we serve first?" Benji thought for a second, then beamed. "Grilled cheese." "But fancy." Ella laughed, but the sound caught in her chest. Something about this boy, his joy, his certainty softened her every time. "You know," Jack said later as they stood near a newly painted wall watching Benji draw a chalk mural with 2 other kids, "he doesn't do that for just anyone. Do what? Let people in. Smile like that. Laugh." Ella was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "Neither do I." That evening, after the workday wrapped, Jack offered to walk her back to her car. The sidewalks glistened and the hush of fresh snow made everything feel suspended. "I got a call from one of your board members today," Jack said casually. Ella's brows lifted. "Really? What for?" "Said they were surprised to hear you were involved in manual labor. Asked if I had anything to do with this." "Phase." Ella rolled her eyes. "Let me guess." Charles Jack nodded. "That's the one." She stopped walking. "Jack, I need you to know something." He turned to her, waiting. "I'm not doing this to make headlines. I'm not trying to prove a point or redeem my image. I'm doing this because, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm actually building something that matters. Not for shareholders, not for PR, for people." Jack studied her for a long beat. Then, "Do you remember what I said the first night we met? That I looked like someone who fixed people like a quarterly report?" He smiled. "Yeah, I was wrong." "Oh, you don't fix people, Ella. You invite them to stand beside you, and somehow that's enough." She blinked, caught off guard. That might be the kindest thing anyone said to me in a decade. "Then maybe you've been talking to the wrong people." Their eyes held. And in that stillness beneath a lamppost casting golden light onto silver streets, something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Back at the apartment, Benji sat cross-legged on the floor, arranging his crayons like chess pieces. "I think Miss Ella should move in," he said seriously. Jack, drying dishes nearby, raised a brow. "You do?" "Yeah. She can sleep on the couch, and I'll teach her how to make real grilled cheese." With the crust cut off. Jack chuckled. You're getting awfully used to her being around. Benji paused. Is that bad? Jack walked over, crouched beside him. No, buddy. It's not bad. It's just, she's busy. She runs a company. But she still shows up, Benji said. And people who show up matter. Jack sat back on his heels, stunned by the truth of it. His son had spoken the very words Jack had been too afraid to think out loud. 3 days later, the Hearth's kitchen was finally functional. The first test night would serve 30 people, no cameras, no donors, just food hands and stories. Ella arrived early, wearing an apron that said, "This kitchen is fueled by hope." Benji had picked it out from a thrift box. As she washed her hands at the deep metal sink, Jack stood beside her. You nervous? He asked. Ella shook off the water, grabbing a towel. Terrified. Good. That means you care. She glanced at him. What if we mess this up? Jack gave a slow smile. Then we clean it up. Together. The dinner service was a beautiful kind of chaos. Laughter echoed in the kitchen. Bowls clinked. Volunteers moved in practiced rhythm. And amid it all, Ella stood behind the counter, ladling stew, greeting guests not with perfection, but with presence. One elderly woman took her bowl, looked Ella in the eyes, and said, "You're not who I thought you'd be." Ella replied with a warm smile. Most people aren't. Later, as she wiped down tables beside Jack, she asked, "Did you see the way that man looked at his food, like it was the first time he felt seen?" Jack nodded. Food isn't just fuel, Ella. It's dignity served hot. She looked at him, eyes damp. I never understood that until now. He placed a hand gently over hers on the table. You do now. That night, as she walked to her car, Benji ran up behind her. Miss Ella. She turned crouching as he threw his arms around her. Tonight felt like Christmas, he whispered. Ella blinked hard. That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me. He looked up. Even better than being on Forbes. She smiled. Way better. Then you're doing it right, he said simply. And just like that, the Ice Queen of Wall Street melted into a woman who knew finally what enough felt like. And what it meant to be home. The first time Jack saw the folder, it was by accident. He had stayed late at the hearth after helping fix a faulty pilot light in the kitchen. Ella had left her satchel on one of the prep tables, half unzipped the top corner of a document, poking out like a whisper that didn't know how to stay hidden. He wasn't looking to snoop. But the bold heading caught his eye. Proposal to Thorn Board Transfer of Community Kitchen Asset, PR Leverage Recommendations. His breath caught. He pulled it free just enough to read the first few lines. Though the hearth is a meaningful pilot project, its long-term viability should be assessed for brand alignment, PR value, and potential tax optimization under Thorn Dynamics' Social Responsibility Division. He read the sentence again, and then again. Each word landed heavier than the last. By the time Ella returned from a phone call, Jack was standing by the prep table, the folder in his hand. "What is this?" he asked, voice low. She froze mid-step. Her eyes dropped to the folder. "Jack, you told me this wasn't about branding," he said. "You said this wasn't for PR. It's not." She took a breath, stepping closer, "At least not for me, but it is for the company. Isn't it?" His voice trembled now, not with rage, but something deeper. "Tell me you're not selling our story." Ella's face faltered, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked like she didn't have an answer. "I didn't mean for you to see that yet," she said quietly. "That's not a denial." She placed the clipboard gently on the table. "Jack, I have shareholders. I have legal teams. I needed to frame this in a way they'd approve." "You mean spin it?" "No," she said, eyes sharp with hurt. "I mean protect it. The board would have killed this project in a second if I didn't make it look valuable to them. So you dressed it up like charity." Jack snapped. "Like a tax write-off with a warm smile. That's not fair." "No," he said, stepping back. "What's not fair is using my son's drawing in a pitch deck. What's not fair is turning the most honest thing we've built into another polished presentation." Ella opened her mouth, then shut it. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "Jack." She tried again, softer this time. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. And that's supposed to make it better." He stared at her, this woman who had stood beside him shoulder to shoulder, who had laughed in his kitchen, who had wiped down tables like she was born to belong there. And now he felt like a footnote in her narrative. "I thought we were partners," he said, voice hollow. "We are." Jack shook his head. "No, Ella. You are a CEO. I was just a chapter." She flinched like the words had slapped her. He turned and walked away. That night, Jack didn't go home. He and Benji ended up at a friend's spare couch 2 blocks from the shelter they once lived in. Jack lay awake in the dark, listening to the boy breathe. Benji stirred sometime past midnight. "Dad," his voice was small, tentative. "Yeah. Are we leaving?" "Miss Ella?" Jack swallowed. "I don't know, buddy. Did she do something bad?" Jack paused. "No. She just forgot how much it mattered." Benji was quiet a moment. "She looked really sad when we left." Jack closed his eyes. "People only look like that," Benji whispered when they wanted to stay. Meanwhile, across the city, Ella stood alone in the kitchen they had built together. The lights were off. Her heels echoed faintly on the polished concrete floor, and her coat was still draped over the same chair where Benji had once sat eating leftover stew. She reached for her phone, drafted a message, deleted it, again and again. Her hand trembled as she picked up the crayon drawing Benji had given her, the one where she wore a cape. She ran her fingers along the paper and whispered, "I never wanted to be the villain in your story." The next morning, the boardroom at Thorne Dynamics buzzed with idle chatter and clinks of porcelain cups. PowerPoint decks lined the digital screen. Shareholders leaned back in ergonomic chairs, waiting to be impressed. Ella stood at the head of the table, a remote in one hand, silence in the other. But she didn't click the next slide. She closed the laptop instead. "I'm canceling the rollout." Murmurs, gasps. One man actually dropped his spoon. "What did you say?" asked Charles Dempsey, the oldest and loudest board member. "I said, we're not packaging the hearth as a corporate asset," Ella replied. "We're stepping back. You're walking away from a PR goldmine. I'm walking towards something more valuable." Charles scoffed. "Is this about that man, that janitor with the kid?" Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "His name is Jack Rourke, and he's not a janitor. He's the backbone of the project you're trying to monetize." She looked around the room, gaze steady. "You can remove me as CEO if you want, but I will not let you put your fingerprints on something sacred just to make the next quarter look shinier." Silence. Complete. Still. Then, slowly, her legal counsel leaned forward. "If the foundation owns the property and it's outside the for-profit structure." "It is," Ella confirmed. "I signed the transfer papers this morning." The board stared. Ella stood taller than ever. "I built an empire out of logic," she said. "But this I built with heart. And I'm not handing that over." She walked out of the room before anyone could argue. 3 days passed. Jack didn't call. Benji asked less often each night if they were going back. And Ella. She just kept showing up. To the kitchen. To the alley where they had once handed out blankets. To the bench where she'd first met Benji in the snow. No cameras, no coat, just her, waiting. On the 4th night, Jack showed up. She was sitting on the back steps of the hearth, hugging her knees against the cold. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her. For a long time, they listened to the wind move through the alley. Then Jack said quietly, "You didn't have to choose us over your empire." She looked at him. "I didn't. I chose me. And it turns out, that meant choosing you." His voice cracked, barely audible. "You could have told me. I was afraid." "Of what? Of being just another person who used you?" Jack looked at her, and finally he saw it. The weight she'd been carrying. Not power, but fear. Not of failure, but of being seen and not being enough. He reached out, took her hand, held it like it had always belonged there. "You're more than enough," he whispered. "You always were." Ella didn't cry. She didn't need to, because for the first time in her life she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just home. Winter deepened in New York, casting its long shadow across frozen sidewalks and glowing windows. But inside the hearth, something warmer was taking shape brick by brick, breath by breath. It no longer felt like just a shelter or a kitchen. It felt like a promise being kept. Jack stood over a large drafting table near the back office, tracing his fingers along the updated layout he'd drawn by hand. The place was coming together. Real floors, real walls, real names on every clipboard. People who used to hide in the cracks of the city now moved with purpose, direction, hope. And yet, something still flickered behind his eyes. "Looks solid," Ella said softly from the doorway, watching him. Jack didn't turn. "I can't stop checking it. I don't know if I'm being cautious or scared." She stepped closer. Maybe both. Maybe that's what building something from scratch feels like. He looked up at her, then down at the plans. "When you've lost everything once, it's hard to believe something this good will stay." Ella nodded slowly. "I know the feeling. You keep waiting for the floor to fall out, even when you built the floor yourself." She walked to the window, gazing out at the courtyard where Benji and a few other kids were building a crooked snowman with mismatched gloves and too much joy. "Benji's smiling again," she said. "Really smiling. It's different now." Jack followed her gaze. "Yeah, he's starting to believe this life won't be taken away from him." "Do you—" Jack turned back to her. "I want to." A pause. "Then let me show you something," she said. They took the train uptown. Ella led Jack through a narrow street lined with quiet buildings and then stopped in front of an old cafe. The windows were boarded, the paint chipped, but the bones were beautiful. Jack squinted. "This place." She pulled a key from her coat pocket and slid it into the lock. "I bought it years ago," she said, "back when I was still trying to convince myself that someday I'd slow down. I never did. It just sat here. Empty." She pushed open the door, revealing a dusty but charming interior, checkered tiles, a wooden counter, a long-forgotten chalkboard menu still faintly reading today's special tomato basil soup. Jack stepped inside, his breath visible in the cold air. "Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to help me turn it into something." He turned slowly. Something like a real space, a cafe, bakery, training center, a bridge between the hearth and the world outside it. Jack laughed short and low. "You don't think small, do you?" Ella stepped forward, eyes bright. "Not anymore. Not since you." He studied her for a long moment. Then, gently, "Ella, this is huge. I know, but I don't want to do it alone. I've done too many things alone." Jack glanced at the space again. This place could smell like fresh bread. We could teach baking skills, host family nights, poetry readings, and give second chances room to breathe. He turned to her fully, something soft blooming behind his expression. "You know," he said quietly, "you talk like someone who finally believes in her own heart." Ella looked at him and didn't blink. "Because I finally do." That evening, they returned to the hearth. Benji ran up the moment they walked through the door, his face lit with the fire of important news. "Guess what?" Ella crouched beside him. "What I got picked to hand out the first tray at dinner tomorrow. Ms. Rachel said I do it with presents, whatever that means." Jack ruffled his son's hair. "It means you show up." Benji beamed. "Well, I want to show up every day." He ran off to finish coloring a thank you card for one of the volunteers. Ella stood beside Jack, watching the boy with a quiet reverence. "You did that," she said. Jack shook his head. "No, we did." Later that night, Jack found Ella alone in the small conference room, sitting at the table with a sketch pad drafting ideas for the cafe project. He leaned in the doorway. "You don't rest much, do you?" She looked up smirking. I used to think rest was weakness. And now I think it's sacred. Jack entered, sitting across from her. You've changed. She nodded slowly. You helped me remember who I was before I started mistaking ambition for worth. He tilted his head. And who were you? Ella smiled, a girl who wanted to feed people, who used to help her dad in their kitchen making pancakes too early in the morning and dreaming about changing the world. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then, with deep sincerity, you didn't stop being her Ella. You just got lost in a world that doesn't reward softness. Her eyes shimmered. You say things like that, Jack, and I wonder how the world ever overlooked you. He shrugged. Because I stopped asking it to see me. Ella reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. Well, she said, her voice steady. I see you now. He looked down at their hands, calloused fingers, polished nails, and back up at her. Then with a half-smile that trembled like truth, he whispered, Then maybe it's time I start seeing myself too. That night after she left, Jack sat with Benji on their old second-hand couch in the apartment above the hearth. Benji leaned his head against his dad's shoulder. Miss Ella's gonna build another place, right? Looks like it. You gonna help Jack? Looked down. What do you think I think she makes you smile without your face even trying? Jack chuckled. That obvious, huh? Benji nodded. You always looked tired before. Now you just look full. Full like soup. On a good day. Jack laughed, pulling his son into a hug. Downstairs, Ella stepped into the kitchen. The light was dim. A leftover tray of cornbread sat cooling on the counter. The smell of thyme and honey lingered in the air. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't chasing the future. She was building it. One miracle at a time. The air in the Thorne Dynamics headquarters was sharper than usual that morning. Crisp suits, clipped footsteps, coffee brewed like ammunition. It was quarterly review day, and no one dared be late, except one small visitor, Benji Rourke. He stood in the marble lobby like a drop of color in a grayscale world. His hoodie had a dinosaur on it. His sneakers lit up when he walked, and in his hand was a piece of folded construction paper covered in crayon stars and hearts. Excuse me, he said to the front desk attendant, his voice steady despite the sea of glass and steel towering above him. I need to see Miss Ella Thorne. The woman blinked. Do you have an appointment, sweetheart? Benji thought for a moment. I have a reason. Is that better? The woman couldn't help but smile. Upstairs, Ella sat in the boardroom, half listening to a revenue projection while her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. Front desk. There's a small visitor here. Says he's yours. Ella's heart flipped. Excuse me, she said, rising mid-presentation. Something important just walked in. When she reached the lobby, the sight of Benji standing there, little chin held high. Backpack slipping off one shoulder nearly undid her. Benji, she said, crouching. What are you doing here? Is everything okay? He handed her the folded construction paper. I made this. It's for your office. So you don't forget. Ella unfolded it. Inside was a drawing, the hearth, a rainbow over the building, stick figure versions of her Jack and Benji standing under the sun. Above them, in big block letters, Real matters more. Ella's eyes stung. I love it, she whispered. Benji nodded seriously. Good. 'Cause sometimes grown-ups forget the best stuff. She smiled, then bit her lip. Did your dad know you came? He thinks I'm at the library with Miss Rachel. Her brows lifted. So you ran off. Walked off, Benji corrected. And the crossing guard helped. Ella sat beside him on the lobby bench. Why did you really come? Benji swung his legs. Because I saw you yesterday. You looked tired, but not the sleepy kind. The kind where your heart gets heavy. She turned to him, stunned by his clarity. And you thought a drawing would fix that? Benji looked up dead serious. No, I thought being seen would. Ella blinked fast. This child. This small brave soul who had slept on a bus bench not long ago, he saw the world more clearly than most adults in penthouse meetings. "You're right," she said softly. "People need to be seen." "And heard," Benji added. Ella wrapped an arm around him. "I promise I'm still listening, Benji, even when I'm tired." "Good," he said, snuggling into her side, "because when people stop listening, the world gets too loud." Later that evening, Jack stood outside the hearth waiting for Ella, his arms crossed as she stepped out of her car. "Do I need to ground him?" he asked, though there was no real heat in his voice. Ella exhaled. He was diplomatic, eloquent, and mildly terrifying. "Honestly, I think he should run the board." Jack smirked. "He has opinions. He has truth." They walked inside together, the warmth of the space immediately embracing them. In the back room, volunteers packed food for a neighborhood night event. Laughter drifted from the kitchen where the stew was bubbling and cornbread rose golden in the oven. Ella paused. "Do you ever wonder what this would look like if we hadn't met on that bench?" Jack glanced at her. "No, because we were meant to meet on that bench." She looked at him, startled. Some things he said don't need planning. They just need presence. That night they served dinner not to the homeless but to the overlooked. Working-class families, elderly women on fixed incomes, teens too proud to admit they skipped lunch to pay phone bills. Benji stood at the front with a little apron and clipboard labeled "Welcome, Captain," shaking hands like a mayor. When a young girl shyly admitted she'd never had soup that didn't come from a can, Ella knelt down, offered her a second bowl, and said, "Everyone deserves food that was made with care." Later, Jack sat beside her on the curb outside, watching the stars blink through the haze. He looked at her hand, now resting inches from his. "You know," he said, "I never believed in miracles." Ella turned. "And now I believe in moments." She tilted her head. "Explain." "Moments when everything changes, not with thunder, not with lightning, just with a person choosing to stay." He looked at her, voice low. "And you stayed." Ella's heart thudded. "I wanted to," she said. "No," Jack replied. "You chose to. And that makes all the difference." He gently reached for her hand. "I've spent years bracing for people to walk away," he continued. "But you didn't. You leaned in. And every time I flinched, you waited." Their fingers intertwined, tentative, then sure. Ella looked up at the sky. "Benji says when someone sees you and stays, that's when the world starts to heal." Jack smiled. "Then maybe the world's finally on the mend." Inside the kitchen, lights dimmed one by one. Outside, a small boy clutched his clipboard like treasure, and on a quiet curb in the heart of a city that never stopped moving, two people sat side by side, not fixing each other. Just staying. And in that staying, they discovered something rare. Not rescue, not romance, but real. And real, as Benji once drew in block crayon letters, matters more. It was Sunday morning, and the city was still. Snow fell in soft spirals outside the hearth's tall windows, but inside the air buzzed with quiet purpose. Jack stood in the middle of the community kitchen looking over a handwritten list taped to the wall, mentors, instructors, residents' meals. The new rotation system Ella had helped him design was already working. But today, something else stirred in him, something bigger than logistics. He glanced toward the front room where Ella knelt beside a mother and her two sons, explaining how to use the new donation lockers without embarrassment. Not with rules, but with kindness. The woman hugged her boys and whispered something before they turned and left with soft smiles. Ella stood and caught Jack watching her. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "More than okay, just taking this in." She crossed the room, rubbing her gloved hands together. The furnace finally stopped groaning. "I think even it's starting to believe." Jack chuckled. Then, without warning, his voice dropped into something quieter. "Ella, I want to ask you something." She paused. "All right." He glanced toward the door, then back at her. "I've been thinking about the way this place runs, the way it feels. She nodded slowly. Go on. I want the people we built this for to run it. I want it to be theirs, not just ours. No foundation nameplates, no donor portraits on the wall, just stories, faces, hands. Ella studied him. You want to hand over control? I want to share it, Jack corrected. With the people who've eaten here, cried here, learned here. I want them to lead with us. I want to build something that doesn't depend on people like us staying forever. She tilted her head. And what would that look like? He pulled a folded sketch from his back pocket, a rough layout simpler than the architectural blueprints. It was made of stick figures and arrows drawn like a child's map. He placed it on the table between them. No titles, he said, just roles. Evolving, shared. You train someone who trains the next. And if one of us steps away, the structure holds. Ella looked at the paper. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful. You know, she murmured, you just described sustainability without ever saying the word. Jack smiled. Big words never built anything. People do. She folded the sketch gently and tucked it into her coat. Then, let's build that kind of house. Later that day, they gathered everyone, the kitchen staff volunteers, residents, even the nearby neighbors who had once only peeked through the windows. They sat in a circle. No podiums, no speeches, just folding chairs and warm mugs of cider. Jack stood and held up a photo of the old hearth building before renovations, broken windows, rusted doors, graffiti on the bricks. This is what it looked like a few months ago, he said. You wouldn't think anything alive could grow here. He paused, then turned the photo around. But you did. He looked around the room. Faces met his, some lined with age, others still in their teens. Some unsure, some hopeful. This place works because of you. You showed up. You cleaned. You cooked. You stayed. He took a deep breath. So today, we want to ask you something. Will you help? Lead it. A silence followed. Then someone stood. Rachel, a woman who'd once slept in a subway tunnel, now ran the evening shift. If you're really serious, she said, voice trembling, then yes. But not as a favor, as an equal. Ella stood beside Jack. Exactly as an equal, she confirmed. No handouts, no hierarchy, just heart. Another voice spoke up, then another. A man in his 50s offered to run vocational classes. A teenage girl volunteered to teach reading circles. A grandmother with trembling hands said she'd knit mittens for the kids who came in without gloves. It was messy. It was unpolished. But it was real. That evening, Jack and Ella sat on the back steps watching snow gather around the soles of their boots. She handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A receipt," she said, teasing. Jack opened it. Inside was a hand-signed document transfer of ownership. The hearth, listing Jack, Rachel, and 3 other community leaders as board directors. Ella's name was absent intentionally. Jack's eyes lifted. "You're stepping back," she nodded. "Not out, just back. I'll be here, but this needs to belong to them." "You were right." He folded the paper carefully. "I don't think I've ever seen someone give something so valuable without needing to be thanked." She smiled faintly. "That's the point, isn't it? If it needs to be thanked, it wasn't really given." Jack looked at her eyes full. "You're not the woman I met in a penthouse suit." "I'm not," she said softly. "That woman could win a courtroom. But this one, she just wants to keep a kitchen warm." He leaned closer, his hand brushing against hers on the step. "You're better than warm, Ella." She looked up. "What am I?" He didn't hesitate. "You're steady, like a house that doesn't fall down when the storm comes." Her breath hitched, and then finally she rested her head against his shoulder. That night, as Ella walked home alone through the snowy streets, she passed an old man huddled near a lamppost. His coat was threadbare. His eyes closed. Without thinking, she pulled off her scarf and wrapped it around his neck. He stirred, looked up startled. Ella knelt down. "It's cold tonight." He blinked at her, unsure. She smiled gently. "But I know a place that's still serving soup." She helped him up, steadying his steps, and they walked toward the hearth. Not as savior and saved, but as strangers who still believed in showing up, and that she knew now was the kind of miracle you could build with your hands. Snow flurried gently across the city, casting Midtown in soft white and silver. The sun peeked through pale clouds, and for once it didn't feel like winter was trying to break anything. It felt like it was blessing something. Inside the hearth, the energy was electric. The main hall, once cold cement and rusted pipes, now pulsed with life. The walls had been painted in warm hues by local artists. Lanterns lined the windows. Long tables were set with mismatched plates and cloth napkins folded into careful triangles. It didn't look fancy. It looked loved. Jack adjusted the sleeves of his cleanest button-down, tugging slightly at the collar like he still didn't quite believe he belonged in a room like this. He scanned the crowd, former shelter residents, hugging volunteers, teenagers passing out cups of cider, neighborhood shopkeepers offering muffins and bread they'd baked just for today. And in the center of it all stood Benji, wearing a paper sash that read, "Ambassador of Smiles." "Dad." Benji waved, grinning wide. "She's coming." Jack turned toward the front entrance. And there she was. Ella stepped inside, dressed simply, her hair swept back. No press, no fanfare, just her, holding a bouquet of mismatched flowers and blinking like she wasn't sure if what she was seeing was real. But it was. This wasn't a dream. It was the result of every choice she'd made since the night she sat beside a boy on a frozen bench. Jack approached her, the room's noise falling to the background. "I wasn't sure you'd walk through that door," he said softly. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "But then I realized this is the only door that ever led somewhere I want to stay." He smiled. "You ready?" Ella held up the flowers. "Only if there's somewhere I can leave these. They don't match the decor." Jack took them gently. "Then they're perfect." The room settled as Rachel, now officially co-director of the Hearth, stepped forward with a mic. "Thank you all for coming." She began, her voice steady despite the tears already glistening in her eyes. This space was built not just from walls, but from will, from people who didn't give up, from a woman who could have looked away and didn't, from a man who stayed, from a child who reminded us what kindness looks like when it's fearless. She turned toward the side curtain. "And, speaking of that child, Benji, would you like to do the honors?" Benji marched proudly up the steps, holding a toy microphone and a folded piece of paper in his tiny hand. The crowd chuckled, charmed and already smitten. He cleared his throat dramatically. "Hi, my name is Benji, and this is my dad." Everyone applauded. Jack grinned and gave a small wave. "And that," Benji continued, pointing, "is Miss Ella. She helped build this. She's not a superhero, but she's the best grown-up I know." The crowd laughed again, warmer this time. Benji kept going. "People say she's a miracle. But I don't think that's right." Ella stiffened, slightly unsure where this was going. Benji looked around the room, his voice somehow both innocent and profound. "She's not a miracle. She's just someone who didn't walk away when things got hard." The room went completely still, and that, Benji said, smiling at her, is better than magic. Ella's hand found her mouth. A few silent tears fell, not because she was overwhelmed, but because for once she felt understood, the kind of understood that doesn't need praise, just presence. Benji wrapped his speech, quickly bowed with theatrical flair, and returned to Jack's side. "She's gonna cry," he whispered, nudging his dad. Jack smiled. "She already is." Later, the music swelled and people moved through the space like family at a reunion. Stories were shared, names remembered, hands clasped. Ella stood by the food counter helping a boy refill trays of sweet potatoes when she felt a hand at her elbow. Jack. He didn't speak at first, just handed her a small box. Inside was a necklace, simple, delicate, hung with a tiny charm, a bench. Ella choked on a breath. "You remembered. I never forgot," Jack said. She looked at him, voice barely above a whisper. That night, I didn't know what I was doing. Jack leaned in. That night, you showed me what staying looks like. A silence passed. Then he added softly, You know what Benji said to me last night. What he said. I think Miss Ella is home even when she's not in a house. Ella swallowed, blinking fast. He's too wise. He's your mirror, Jack said. You gave him that clarity, just by being who you are. She looked around the room, her gaze tracing the mural on the far wall, a mosaic of hands all different shapes and shades holding one another. Above it were painted words built by those who stayed. Ella whispered, I never thought I'd find where I belonged. Jack stepped closer, eyes steady. You didn't find it, Ella. You built it, one act of kindness at a time. That night, long after the lights dimmed and the last guests had gone home, Jack, Ella, and Benji walked through the snow-covered courtyard behind the hearth. The stars were out. Benji chased his shadow in the lamplight, spinning like he was dancing with joy itself. Ella leaned into Jack, her breath visible in the cold. Do you ever wonder why it took us this long to get here? Jack nodded. Because we had to lose everything that didn't matter, to find what did. She reached for his hand. So, this is what enough feels like. Jack squeezed her fingers gently. No, he said. This is what full feels like, and in the quiet hush of night beneath a sky full of stars and promises kept their laughter drifted like the scent of cinnamon on cold air. Not loud, but lasting. A year later, the snow returned. But this time it didn't feel like something to brace against. It felt like a memory coming home. The city had changed in subtle ways, more lights in the windows of old buildings, more strangers smiling at each other on subway stairs, and nestled between two rows of brick townhouses on a quiet midtown block stood Hearth Village. It wasn't just a shelter anymore, it was a community. A greenhouse bloomed behind the main hall with winter herbs tucked under clear glass. A reading nook beside the fireplace now held stories in 3 languages. There were murals, handwritten signs, mismatched mugs stacked neatly in the cafe, and laughter rising from every corner like steam. And at the heart of it all was a small cottage tucked near the community garden with cinnamon on the windowsill and boots drying by the door. Inside, warmth wrapped around the walls like a hug. Ella stood in the kitchen slicing a spiced apple cake. The scent of nutmeg and vanilla swirled through the room. Jack stirred something rich and golden on the stove, humming softly one of those half-forgotten tunes he used to whistle when no one was listening. And Benji knelt on the windowsill forehead, pressed to the frosted glass. They're coming, he called. I see the lanterns. Jack smiled. All of them. Benji nodded, eyes wide. So many, like stars that got tired of flying alone. Ella stepped beside him and looked out. Dozens of paper lanterns drifted into the sky from Hearth Village's front lawn, each one carrying a handwritten wish, a hope, a thank you. Families gathered in coats and scarves, watching their dreams rise with the wind. Benji turned and pointed to one in particular. That one's mine, he whispered. It says, more hugs. Jack chuckled and walked over, wrapping his son in a warm embrace. Wish granted. Ella joined them, her arms circling them both. They stood there, the 3 of them, tucked into each other's warmth as snow danced gently outside. After a while, Benji looked up. Do you think we're someone's wish too? Ella met Jack's eyes, and for a long, still moment, no one spoke. Then she said softly, I think we're the wish they didn't even know how to ask for. Later that night, the fireplace crackled gently, and the cottage dimmed to a soft, golden glow. Jack set 2 mugs of tea on the table. Ella lit the final candle in the window, a tradition now marking the end of the year, not with noise, but with thanks. Benji had fallen asleep on the couch, curled under a quilt stitched by residents from Hearth's first winter. His paper sash, ambassador of smiles, lay draped across the armrest, slightly faded, but still proud. Ella looked at Jack, the flicker of the candlelight reflected in her eyes. Do you remember what you said the night we met? He nodded. I said you looked like someone who fixes people like a quarterly report. She smiled. And you were mostly wrong. Mostly, you were right about the fixing part, she said, but not in the way you thought. Jack sat beside her, resting his hand over hers. You know, I used to think survival was the best we could hope for. And now, she whispered, now I know. We were meant to thrive. Not despite what we went through, but because of it. Ella looked at the fire. Sometimes I wonder, she said, if we never really fell. Maybe we were just being rerouted. Jack chuckled. You're getting philosophical. Only at midnight, she grinned. And only when I'm full. He leaned closer. Are you? She didn't hesitate. Full in the way people mean when they talk about home. The kind of full that doesn't come from winning, but from belonging. Outside, the lanterns had faded into the night sky, but their glow lingered on every face that had stood beneath them. And inside the house made of hands and second chances, 3 souls leaned into each other, quiet, content whole. Elsewhere in the city, someone watched the news clip that played softly on a diner TV. The Hearth Village, once a grassroots effort by community members and a reclusive former CEO, now serves over 1 to 200 meals a week, provides permanent housing solutions, and has expanded to 2 satellite locations. No investors, no corporate nameplates. Just people, just purpose. The man sipped his coffee and murmured, looks like someone finally cracked the code. The waitress, wiping a table nearby, smiled. Kindness isn't complicated. It just needs space to grow. Back at Hearth Village, Jack tucked Benji into bed, brushing a strand of hair from his son's forehead. You know, Jack whispered, when you were born, I used to wonder if I'd be enough. Benji stirred, half asleep. You were? Jack smiled, heart full. As he stepped into the hallway, Ella waited for him, leaning against the doorway. Ready? She asked. He nodded. They stepped outside into the snow, hand in hand, standing beneath the final lantern, rising into the dark, one last light drifting toward the stars. Jack looked up. You ever think? Maybe the miracle wasn't what we found. Ella turned to him, eyes warm. What then? He squeezed her hand. Maybe the miracle was who we became because of it. She smiled through the quiet. And in the hush of falling snow, in a home built from choice, from loss, from light, they stayed. Not as a chapter, not as a rescue, but as a family. And that made all the difference. Sometimes the most life-changing stories don't begin with grand gestures, but with someone who simply chooses to stay. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to let us know, where in the world are you watching from. We love hearing where our soul-stirring stories are reaching. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this story stayed with you? Was it Jack's quiet strength, Ella's transformation, or Benji's simple, powerful truth? And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of hearts that still believe in goodness, healing, and second chances. We release stories like this every day to remind you that kindness is not weakness and hope is never out of style. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay warm, stay kind, and never stop believing.